Hello and welcome to my little channel. My name is Thomas Alexander, and today we want to continue our look into A.J. Deus's paper, The Jewish Serpent King in the Dome of the Rock. Last time we've looked at depictions, woodcuts, drawings from the Middle Ages, and today we want to go into the textual evidence that A.J. proposes to make the case for his claim that the Dome of the Rock is a young creation, if you will, and particularly the inscription inside the Dome of the Rock along the roof of the ambulatory. But before we go into this, there's one thing I want to mention which I forgot to mention last time when we talked about the pictures, and that is the important fact that the people who made those drawings and the woodcuts, they were Christians, and Christians in the late Middle Ages, they couldn't get up close to the Dome of the Rock. They had to watch it from afar, from the Mount of Olives typically. That's where you had the best view. And just to show you how that looks like, here we have a picture of the view from the Mount of Olives. So you can see it's quite small, so it's difficult to get all the details right. But now let's zoom in a little bit. So what you can see here, one second, just let me get my pointer. There we are. It's difficult to see on the capture. Well, let me try to zoom in a bit more. Quality doesn't improve, but so what you see here is also that the columns, the support columns, they do not align with the 8 corners of the octagon of the ambulatory. Which kind of fits with our woodcut here. If you remember, this is the Reuwig woodcut. He's the one person where we know that he's an eyewitness. And last time I did mention that here as well, the support beams, they do not align with the octagon below. And that I therefore believe that he intended to draw it as being round. And I think if you see the photograph that I've just shown, then and compare it, you'll probably have to agree with me. This is the fact that it looks that there's this straight line is more a function of it being a woodcut, and which isn't an exact science. But I think now the combination of the book telling us that it's round and the support beams which are not aligned with the corners, and the fact that it's really not a clear-cut octagon here that we see, I think that all points to the artist intending it to be round. But the later copyists, they interpreted it as being an octagon. So the few drawings or woodcuts where the Dome of the Rock is shown with an octagon-shaped drum, they were all copied from, or mostly copied from, this woodcut here, and they just interpreted it as being an octagon. Whereas, the last time we've seen the pictures, many pictures of eyewitnesses which typically have a round drum. So there's that. Okay, but enough about the pictures. Now let's have a look at the textual evidence. In the introductory video, we've already seen the claims here which A.J. Deus makes, and now it's time for him to put some meat on the bones and to show us the evidence for his claims. Also in the introductory video, we've already seen that by 670 there was a building on top of the Temple Mount, not the Dome of the Rock, something else, and A.J. Deus thought it's at the very eastern part of the Temple Mount. I've shown that that conclusion is not warranted, and that in fact it's more likely that it was either on top of the rock or along the southern edge of the Temple Mount. Now, next, A.J. writes, Anastasius Sinaita attests to large-scale construction activities on the Temple Mount under Abd al-Malik around 690. He viewed the Saracen Arabs in the context of Christian heretics as Malachites, who he described as viewing Jesus as man, venerating other saints, and rejecting the idea of a begotten Son of God. Now, first of all, construction activities around 690, that's perfectly in line with the Dome of the Rock being built. The inscription tells us it was built in 691. So it would make sense, and this is a corroborating evidence for the classical story, I would say. And yes, he's also right that Anastasius Sinaita, he described the Arabs as sort of Christian heretics who did believe that Jesus was just a man. But then here again comes AJ's use of the term Malachites. That doesn't really fit here. Now we know what he means. He means adoptionists or monarchianists or anti-Trinitarians, whatever you want to call them. But Malachites, as far as I know, were always Trinitarian, so that description doesn't fit. Okay, but continuing. Several milestones between Damascus and Jerusalem, as well as temple iconography on pre-Reformed coins, indicate that the Holy City and the Temple Mount were indeed part of a large-scale infrastructure project. But nothing is said about the Dome of the Rock. Well, if there is temple iconography, that would be the Dome of the Rock. So yeah, there is something being said about the Dome of the Rock. And the Dome of the Rock was then this large-scale infrastructure project, of course. This is followed by the Quran's mentioning of the Sufyanid and Marwanid monuments that can be circumambulated. Now remember, in the first video, I think we already talked about this, AJ interprets this passage in the Quran mentioning Safa and Marwa as being monuments on the Temple Mount, but not including the Dome of the Rock. Now, again, I will just reiterate, this is completely without any evidence. This is just pure speculation, and there is better speculation out there. So, yeah, he may be correct, but I would say it's very unlikely. Now, from the late 8th century exists a Bible from the court school of Charlemagne that is now stored in the British Library. It depicts a scene with the annunciation of the birth of John the Baptist to Zechariah at the altar of the Temple of Jerusalem. Although only a round dome is depicted, it is believed that the intent of the designer was to show the Dome of the Rock. Now, here I agree. The intent of the designer was probably to show the Dome of the Rock. Even though this takes place at the temple in Jerusalem before the birth of Christ. But as I mentioned also in the last video, during Middle Ages, people have always transported these ancient stories in their time. So if they want to depict the old temple, they would now go to what's there in their time, which is the Dome of the Rock. But also, of course, this artist from Aachen never saw the Dome of the Rock. He probably went by descriptions. He probably heard it was built in the Byzantine style and was around, and that's what he depicted here. So yeah, I wouldn't say this is evidence on either side. If it's evidence at all, it's evidence for the fact that it was round. At least it was described as being round to the artist who drew this picture. So now it gets more interesting. The traveler Bernard the monk visited the holy city around 870 AD and wrote that, quote, "The Temple of Solomon is in the north, which houses the Saracen synagogue." It is remarkable that Bernard recognized the building as a synagogue. Christian monks do not usually get confused about such fundamental terminology. Moreover, he places the synagogue to the north of the platform, while the Dome of the Rock sits dead center on the north-south axis and offset to the west. To place the rock to the north, his description requires that the entire northern half of the platform would have had to be built after his visit. Okay, now before getting into the meat of this, let's quickly talk about the term synagogue. So AJ makes a big deal out of this, claiming that there is some Jewish origin to the Dome of the Rock. Well, there is to a degree, because it's sort of the new Temple of Solomon. But the term synagogue, I wouldn't fixate on that, because this is the absolute exception here. Now, if the majority of our travel logs, had the term synagogue, if the monks of the time all called it a synagogue, then we should think about it. But we have all kinds of descriptions. In some of the Pilgrims accounts, it's called a church, a temple, a mosque, and a mosque is basically the Eastern Syriac term for church as well. So it's just, he was looking for a word that fits. He thought, I don't want to call it a church, so let's call it a synagogue. Or that's at least a plausible explanation, given that Bernard is the exception here. So I wouldn't put too much weight on this term, or that there's any hidden meaning in there. It's just, he felt that it's the right word to describe the building. Others felt that the term church is the right word, but most people just called it a temple because it was in the place of the temple. Anyway, but now to the more important part. AJ says that according to Bernard the monk, the Temple of Solomon was on the northern edge of the Temple Mount. But once again, this is not what the quote actually says. It says the Temple of Solomon is to the north, which houses a Saracen synagogue. So it's to the north. It doesn't say to the north of what. At least not in this quote. So that's why once again I looked at the original source. So there we are. Thanks again to the Palestine Pilgrims Text Society. It's easy to have access to these old accounts. Now let's just see what Bernard the monk actually wrote here. So he says, moreover, in the city there is yet another church to the south in Mount Sion, called the Church of Saint Simeon, where the Lord washed the feet of his disciples. Okay, so now we're in the south of the city. In this hangs the Lord's crown of thorns, and here it is reported that Saint Mary died. Near which, to the east, is a church in honor of Saint Stephen, in the place where he is said to have been stoned. Okay, so we started out in the south. Now we're moving eastwards. Next, further east is a church in honor of Blessed Peter in the place where he denied the Lord. Okay, so once again we're moving further east. To the north is Solomon's temple, which contains the synagogue of the Saracens. Aha. Okay, so now we are starting in the south, and we were moving eastwards, and now from there it's to the north. So let's have a quick look at a map. Okay, we've seen this map before as well. Here's Jerusalem. South here is to the left. East to the bottom there. Right, so we're starting out in the south, actually in the southwest. I think this is the church he was talking about. And then he's moving eastwards and eastwards and along the wall. And what's to the north of the wall? The southern wall? It's the Temple Mount, the entire Temple Mount. So he's not speaking from the perspective of the mount itself. He's not standing on the mount and saying to the north is the Temple of Solomon. He's at the southern border of the city, and he says to the north is the Temple of Solomon. So AJ's conclusion that there was no Dome of the Rock because the only building was to the north of a platform is again totally baseless. That's not what Bernard said. But actually it gets worse. Let's go back to the text of Bernard the Wise, because keep in mind that among the Christians who went to Jerusalem, the Dome of the Rock has had different names. So they called it the Temple of Solomon, they called it the Temple of the Lord. Sometimes they also called it other names like Bethel. And the Al-Aqsa Mosque was sometimes also called the Temple of Solomon. And so at different times, people use different terminology. So basically what we can say is after the Crusades, the Dome of the Rock was called Temple of Solomon. During the Crusades, it was called the Temple of the Lord. And before, as we are here, well, let's find out what it was called. So, if we just continue reading in Bernard's text, he writes, "Eastward from Mount Calvary is the place where Saint Helena found the cross of the Lord. Thence eastward again is the beautiful gate which leads to the temple of the Lord." The temple of the Lord. Remember that? That's how the Crusaders also called the Dome of the Rock. "This temple is round." Okay, it's round, interesting. It has 3 gates and is surrounded by a very conspicuous court. "In the middle of this temple is the temple not made with hands, i.e. the tabernacle." So this is the cave underneath the rock in the Dome of the Rock. That's called the temple not made with hands. And there's also Aaron's rod and the head of Zacharias and the son of Barachias and the altar which Jacob built to the Lord and the 2 tables of the covenant and the ark of the covenant of the Lord and the manna on which the children of Israel fed in the desert are believed to be in it. Now those are all beliefs associated with the Dome of the Rock. We will go into this more in the next video when I will try to make a positive case of what I think is the meaning of the Dome of the Rock and its origin. But yeah, those are all terms associated with the Dome of the Rock. The name Temple of the Lord is associated with the Dome of the Rock. So he's talking about the Dome of the Rock here. There was a building on the rock and it was round. That's how he describes it. So the dome was round. But let's continue. "In the roof of the temple hangs a golden lamp." Yeah, well, we will also see here that again and again in different accounts. This lamp seems to have been very impressive. But now comes the important bit. "To the south of the temple of the Lord is the temple of Solomon." Remember before we talked about the temple of Solomon and where it's located to the north of, well, somewhere, which turns out to be the southern wall. Well, that's the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Temple of Solomon is the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It's to the south of the Temple of the Lord, which is the Dome of the Rock. So let's go back quickly to our map. Right, so he described how he got to the Temple of the Lord, which is the Dome of the Rock, to the south of which is the Temple of Solomon. There we are, Al-Aqsa Mosque. So both structures were there on the Temple Mount in the year 870 when Bernard the Wise visited Jerusalem. So if you now compare this to what AJ read into this text, it's the exact opposite. He couldn't have been more wrong in the way he read his text. Not only was there a temple on the rock, or dome, not only was there the Dome of the Rock, there was also the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and it all existed in the place where it is today, and it was round. What more can you want? All right, let's continue. Before al-mamun, the Dome of the Rock appears to be invisible. After an alleged enlargement, there was a synagogue. So that's he's still working under the assumption that there was no Dome of the Rock, but there was a synagogue to the north of the platform, for which there's absolutely no evidence outside of Bernard's text, which doesn't even talk about that at all. The synagogue he was talking about was the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is in the very south of the Temple Mount. So yeah, AJ couldn't be more wrong. Although absence of evidence is no evidence of absence, here we are not dealing with some obscure detail of fact, but with one of the most important buildings for all Judaic religions and inscriptions for Islam. No Jew took note, no Christian, no Muslim, no body, no soul. Well, we've just met one who took note. He was a Christian and he saw the Dome of the Rock. In the late 9th century, the Sunni historian and geographer Yaqubi reported in a way that is suggestive of the building having stood long enough to leave room for interpretation. And now I will skip most of the bit, but in the end here is where the important quote is. So, then Abd al-Malik built above the Sakra a dome and hung it around with curtains of brocade. And he instituted doorkeepers for the same, and the people took the custom of circumambulating the rock as Sakra of Jerusalem. even as they had paced around the Kaaba at Makkah, and the usage continued thus all the days of the dynasty of the Umayyads. Okay, so that seems to confirm the classical story. What does AJ make of it? He says, in short, the first prototype of the Dome of the Rock was built between 870 AD and 897 AD. How does he get to those numbers? Well, in 870, he concluded there was no Dome of the Rock because of what Bernard the Monk said. But in 897, clearly there was a Dome of the Rock, and it was attributed to al-malik, just like what we think today. So it must have been built in between. Now we know, of course, he's completely wrong, because by 870 there definitely was a Dome of the Rock. But let's even ignoring that for a minute, just think about what that means. So they build a new dome, a magnificent building that is that nobody can overlook. And the first thing they do is to say it was built by al-malik 200 years before. That wouldn't fly unless it was satire or something, which it wasn't. So this is like, how can this belief even have formed? So I would argue that we can't, of course, take this quote as gospel, but it is evidence, and it points to there being a tradition that links the building, the Dome of the Rock, with al-malik, which could only have existed if the dome was much older than 870 AD. Because otherwise, it's like, I don't know, if in 1920 people in Paris, somebody said, well, the Eiffel Tower was built by King Louis XV, and like all the contemporaries would say, are you mad? I've been there, I've seen it being built. It was 20 years ago. I was there. So that just doesn't work. So it has to be much older than 870 for this tradition to exist. And this is a tradition because we will see more of these stories. So, for example, he brings up one from the year 903. Again, here we have the dome linked to al-malik. Now, at this time, I will not read the entire paragraph, but yeah, you can read it yourself in the document. I'll link to it in the description below. But basically, it says the same thing. And again, in 978, we have yet another description. This time with a bit more detail. Here, Ibn Hawqal writes, the holy city is nearly as large as Al-Ramla, the capital of the province of Philistin. It is a city perched high on the hills, and you have to go up to it from all sides. There's here a mosque, a greater than which does not exist in all Islam. The main building, here now, this is supposedly the Al-Aqsa Mosque, that's A.J. Deus's insertion, I guess, occupies the southeastern angle of the mosque and covers about half the breadth of the same. The remainder of the haram area is left free and is nowhere built over except in the part around the rock. At this place there has been raised a stone terrace like a platform of great unhewn blocks, in the center of which, covering the rock, is a magnificent dome. The rock itself is about breast high above the ground, its length and breadth being almost equal. That is to say, some 10 ells and odd by the same across. You may descend below it by step, as though going down to a cellar, passing through a door measuring some 5 ells by 10. The chamber below the rock is neither square nor round, and is above man's stature in height. Now, what does H.G. Deus make of this? The building was standing on top of its platform. While the Dome of the Rock would sit at its current place, the mosque was much larger, the greatest in the world, than the current Al-Aqsa Mosque. Now again, I have to question H.A. Deus's reading comprehension skills, because that's not what the text says. The text says, yes, it's the largest mosque in all of Islam, but the term mosque clearly refers to the entire area. I mean, it even is here in brackets in the quote itself. I don't know, either H.A. Deus has done this himself. Yeah, area, noble sanctuary. That's what is meant by mosque here. So the author is not saying that the Al-Aqsa Mosque, as we understand it today, is the greatest mosque in all of Islam. He's talking about the Temple Mount, clearly, because he also refers to the Al-Aqsa Mosque as the main building of the mosque, right? And again, AJ understood this, and he put in brackets, the main building is supposedly the Aqsa Mosque. So I don't understand how he can then come to the conclusion here that the building was standing on top of its platform while the Dome of the Rock would sit at its current place. The mosque was much larger, the greatest in the world, than the current Al-Aqsa Mosque. He doesn't understand his own insertions, apparently. He inserted this bit about the main building being the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the mosque being the entire sanctuary. Okay, its center line would have been completely off from an orientation towards the foundation stone. So yeah, that's here. So basically, he's saying, well, for one, the mosque was much larger. Or the main building was much larger than the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and it was not aligned with the Dome of the Rock. Which, I mean, that's plausible because that's sort of what the text says, if you remember. Let's go back real quick. Yeah, it says the main building occupies the southeastern angle of the mosque, so that is roughly the area which H.A. Deus here marked as red, and covers about half the breadth of the same. So yeah, so I think this seems reasonable what he's putting there, but the way he got there is again crazy, because he apparently doesn't understand his own text. So the first report outside of earlier tradition that claims al-Malik's involvement emerges with a late 10th century geographer, al-Muqaddasi. He writes, the Al-Aqsa Mosque lies at the southeastern corner of the holy city. The stones of its foundation, which were laid by David, are 10 ells or a little less in length. Of these, the Caliph al-Malik subsequently built using smaller but well-shaped stones, and battlements are added above. This mosque is even more beautiful than that of Damascus, for during the building of it they had for a rival and as a comparison the great church belonging to the Christians at Jerusalem, and they built this to be even more magnificent than the other. But in the days of the Abbasids occurred the earthquakes which threw down most of the main building, all in fact except the portion round the mihrab. The edifice rose firmer and more substantial than ever it had been in former times. The more ancient portion remained, even like a beauty spot, in the midst of the new. Okay. So what does H.A. say about this? The main building of the mount had almost entirely been destroyed to its foundation in the mid-9th century. True, that's what the text says. Likewise, the Dome of the Rock could not have escaped substantial damage. Well, it kind of could have, but more on that in a second. In later descriptions, he appears to treat the building as though it were an integral part of an ongoing major construction project. Okay. So could the Dome of the Rock have escaped substantial damage of an earthquake? Yes, absolutely. And why is that? Let's have a quick look here at floor plan of the Dome of the Rock. And you can see that the bulk of the Dome of the Rock is supported by these pillars. Right, let me get my pointer again here. So there are these pillars here, 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 and then also around the center. And also here the smaller pillars. So basically it's completely held up by pillars. Now the thing about pillars is they give you a little bit of wiggle room, which is very helpful in case of an earthquake. for instance, people in Japan have known this for a long time. They always built earthquake-proof buildings by adding a wooden beams, or putting wooden beams below the buildings, which provided the necessary wiggle room so that shocks can be absorbed. If, on the other hand, you have like a very solid wall, which seems to be indestructible, well, if the earth shakes and pressure mounts, there's nowhere to go for the wall. It can't just wiggle back and forth and absorb the shocks. So it is ripped apart. This can actually be seen quite nicely when looking at pictures of World War II when there were bombing raids. So here we have the city of Cologne, and as you can see, there isn't much left. Pretty much everything's reduced to rubble, except for the Gothic dome, the Gothic cathedral. And the thing about Gothic architecture is that it's very delicate, like the Dome of the Rock, if you will. It's all these delicate support structures and columns and all of that, providing it the necessary wiggle room. So even though it was hit by countless bombs, it could absorb the shock waves. And we can also look inside. So again, this is shortly after it was hit by all those bombs. And yes, so you can see the windows are blown out, and there's a lot of rubble here, and the roof is partially gone, and there was a fire inside and all of that. But if you look at the pillars, they still look fine, and even these small statues here, which apparently haven't suffered very much. So if those statues can survive hundreds of bombs falling down on them, I think it's plausible that a mosaic which sits on top of columns can survive an earthquake. If anything, here there was much more destruction going on, because there was not just pressure waves going through here, but also debris and shrapnel and whatnot was flying through the air. So if you have a delicate building, chances of it surviving an earthquake are actually higher than when you have this monumental building with massive walls. Okay. Now let's move on. Caliph this is another quote by al-Muqaddasi, so the same guy from above. Caliph al-Malik, noting the greatness of the dome of the Kumama, so that's how the Muslims of the time called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So Caliph al-Malik, noting the greatness of the dome of the Kumama and its magnificence, was moved lest it should dazzle the minds of the Muslims, and hence erected above the rock the dome which now is seen there. In the center of the platform is the Dome of the Rock, which rises above an octagonal building. So I've highlighted this because the dome, what he calls the dome, does not include the octagonal building. It rises above the octagonal building, right? So the dome is what we nowadays would call the drum, including the cupola on top. Having 4 gates, one opposite to each of the flights of steps leading up from the court. All these are adorned with gold. Enclosing each of them is a beautiful door of cedar wood, finely worked in pattern. There last were sent by command of the mother of the Caliph al-Muqaddir Billah. At each of the gates is a balustrade of marble and cedar wood with brasswork without and in the railing. Likewise are gates, but these are unornamented. So now, what does HDUs make out of this? Finally, the Dome of the Rock is undoubtedly an octagonal building. That's not what he says. He says the Dome of the Rock rises above an octagonal building. So if you want to count the ambulatory, then yes, there is an octagonal part to it. But he doesn't say that the Dome of the Rock is octagonal. It says the dome rises above an octagonal building. So once again, reading comprehension, a major problem for HIDs. Why then would he compare it with the Holy Sepulchre? Well, because they are similar. Let me show you a reconstruction of an earlier version of the Holy Sepulchre. This is actually not the best one, but it was like the one with the highest resolution that I could find. This is already a bit later, which you can tell because here the ambulatory has already been cut off in this reconstruction. So originally it was really going way all around, just like in the Dome of the Rock. So why would you compare those two? Because they are very similar. And if the drum was round in the Dome of the Rock, which we've heard before, right? Then they're even more similar. The problem that AJ has is reading comprehension. That makes it harder for him because now he thinks, the drum is octagonal. So why would you compare it to the Holy Sepulchre? I mean, you could even then could compare it to Holy Sepulchre because they would still be very similar. But that's not what the text says anyway. So, continuing. Why then would he compare it with the Holy Sepulchre if not because of preconceived information about a no longer existing building that he already had? Yes, that's again completely without any foundation whatsoever. I don't even know what to say to this. Preconceived information about a no longer existing building that was more like the Holy Sepulchre than the Dome of the Rock, and that's why when he compares the Dome of the Rock to the Holy Sepulchre, that's what was in the back of his mind, maybe unwittingly. It doesn't make any sense, sorry. Renovations at the Dome seem to have been underfoot at the beginning of the 10th century. Well, that is true, and I will go into that a bit more in the next episode when I try to make my case for what happened. So we do know that during Fatimid times there were lots of repairs and reconstructions and so on. So in 1019, al-Wasiti, the preacher on the Temple Mount, produces a detailed account of al-Malik's involvement. So again, I'm not going to read this entire text. He goes really through the process of how the dome was built, and he definitely goes into a lot of detail. So centuries after the fact, we are handed names of architects. Receiving the approval of al-Malik subjects, a perfect building was erected that no Muslim could have explained, one so beautiful that it could not be improved upon. The dome that was previously covered in red gold is now cast in al-Malik's gold coins. There is no need to pretend that this is anything other than a fairy tale. I would say AJ has a point here. This comes 200 years after the dome was, or more than 300 years after the dome was built, and now we get the names of the architects and so on. So this definitely smells like legendary storytelling. So I wouldn't trust this text either. At least when it comes to these details about who the architects were and how the process of building the Dome of the Rock looked like and so on. This sounds a lot like legend. But clearly it builds upon the previous stories where, I mean, we've had for centuries stories about al-Malik building the dome. I mean, AJ has quoted them. So this builds on top of them. So while this isn't evidence, it's just but for anything because it comes too late. It affirms that this story about al-Malik, which building the Dome of the Rock, which had existed for centuries, still exists in the 11th century, which I would say gives credence to the fact that it's that's what happened, at least the core of it. So I'm with AJ that we shouldn't believe this story, but all the evidence points to al-Malik having been involved. At least the dome being so old that it's plausible for all the people at the time that al-Malik was involved. Right now, here he goes into this Jewish serpent king bit. I already said I'm going to jump over it. So he finds lots of demonic imagery in the mosaics, and he argues that the quality is too high to have originated in the 7th century. Which again is of course bogus. I mean, we have mosaics of the highest quality from centuries before the 7th century, and we have terrible mosaics much later than the 7th century. So not a valid argument. And and all of this theological background, I can't believe any of it, to be honest. But luckily that's not the point of this video. Okay, now let's move on. The inscriptions, so now we're talking about the inscriptions in the Dome of the Rock, are signed off with or corrected to the signature of the Abbasid Caliph al-Mamun, who was Imam over 100 years after al-malik. True. In the Great Mosque of Damascus, he had no remorse to remove or alter the Umayyad inscriptions. Also true. So the Abbasids, they did replace Umayyad names and removed inscriptions. They destroyed their temples and desecrated their graves. That's what they did. That's what they did in the Dome of the Rock, where they removed Abd al-Malik's name, and that's what they did in the Great Mosque of Damascus, where they removed al-Walid's name. Actually, I do also have a source for that one. Here we have this book called The Great Mosque of Damascus. So, and here we find the following. On the contrary, although it was clearly considered impressive and is occasionally mentioned as such, the mosque is generally ignored in Abbasid accounts of the city, and there are several reports suggesting that it was among the Umayyad monuments of Syria which suffered at the hands of the successor dynasty. So this is actually an important bit as well. So here this book is obviously about the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus, which is also a very impressive building, and yet during the Abbasid times there's very little mention thereof. Why? Because it was an Umayyad monument, and the Abbasids didn't want to put any focus on anything Umayyad. And the same is true for the Dome of the Rock. So one big point of AJ is that up until the time of al-Mamun, this Dome of the Rock seems to be invisible. Again, similar reason why it was an Umayyad monument and the Abbasids hated the Umayyads. Right, let's move on. So far as Abbasid treatment of Umayyad monuments was concerned, epigraphic mutilation accounting to a prise de possession was something of a hallmark. The Caliph al-Mahdi substituted his own name for that of the Umayyad Caliph in the foundation inscription of al-Walid's mosque at Medina. So exactly the same as what happened with the Dome of the Rock. The same practice was followed by al-mamun, who altered the foundation inscription in the Dome of the Rock. Yeah, there we have it. Mutilated the inscriptions in the Great Mosque of Damascus and is said to have removed the muqsulas from the congregational mosques of Syria on the pretext that they constituted an innovation. The appropriation of key Umayyad monuments was evidently not confined to the realm of the symbolic, for it is reported that the marbles and furnishing of the Great Mosque of Aleppo were taken for a reuse elsewhere. Describing the splendors of the Damascus Mosque, Ibn Sassar notes, "Indeed, it did not disappear when the government passed to the Abbasids, and they conquered them, i.e. the Umayyads, and destroyed the edifices. Prayers were abandoned in this mosque for a period of time. They took all the marble and other things which were in it, planning its destruction and the removal of its traces." So that's what happened elsewhere. It makes sense that something similar happened with the Dome of the Rock. So what does AJ make of this? The dedication at the Dome of the Rock is taken as a fraud because the tiles did not match. He had to squeeze his dedication, Abd Allah, the Imam al-Mamun, into the previous space, and he omitted to also alter the year of construction, 691 AD. I wonder, maybe just as an explanation, I think in the introduction I already mentioned this, but yes, al-Mamun replaced the name of Abd al-Malik, but he needed more space, so his name was crammed in a bit, so it looks different, and the tiles that were used for the mosaics were slightly different. However, as AJD just said, he did not alter the year, so it still says 691, even though that was long before al-Mamun was born. So now AJ continues, "I wonder which forger might make this fraud so obvious." And therein lies once again a problem in the way AJ approaches a text. So he's really limited by his approach. So he's like a fixed idea and he can't deviate from it. The simple answer to this question is that it was never intended to be a fraud. This wasn't about taking credit for something that he didn't do. Everybody knew that the dome was older than al-mamun. The point was to extinguish the names of the Umayyads. The same has happened in many cultures over many centuries and millennia. Think about the ancient Egyptians. There were pharaohs who, for one reason or another, were not well liked by the successors, were erased, or they tried to erase them anyway. They didn't pretend that they were something they weren't. They just erased the names or replaced the cartouche with a different name. It wasn't about forging anything. It was about erasing the memory of a person, or in this case, an entire dynasty. So yeah, it wasn't an obvious fraud because it wasn't supposed to be a fraud, because everybody knew the dome was old. It was only about getting rid of Umayyad names. So, continuing. Due to the sustained damage of the mosaics during many earthquakes, they must have been repaired and restored many times over the centuries. Yeah, probably true. Again, I don't think they were damaged as much as AJ thinks they were, because, as I explained, the dome is resilient to earthquakes, at least more so than many other buildings, but there definitely were some there was definitely some reason to repair things. But this is the evidence that al-Mamun committed a fraud to take credit for a building that he did not erect? No, this is the evidence that al-Mamun tried to erase Umayyad names. Yeah, so the biggest threat to the notion that inscriptions and mosaics could have survived from the 7th century until today was an earthquake in 1015 that caused the dome to fall onto the enshrined rock. 2 inscriptions attest to the restoration of the collapsed dome in 1022. Yes, there was damage, but he makes it sound like the whole thing, collapsed. He says collapsed and fell onto the rock. That's not what happened. Yes, there was damage, and yes, it was repaired. So, now here, this is interesting again. The Russian abbot Daniel visited the Holy Land in 1106 and left detailed descriptions that include the first mention of interior mosaics. According to him, the dome was round and decorated inside with marvelous and unspeakably beautiful mosaics. The walls are covered with marble plates and rich marble, very beautiful. He notes 12 round and 8 stone columns. There were 4 round doors with gilded copper covering. The cupola is inside decorated with very artistic and unspeakable mosaics, and outside covered with gilded copper. So this again matches the descriptions we have from before and from after, and even calls it round. This time AJ noticed that he called it round. So what's his response? At that time, geometry was not the strong suit of clergymen. Everything with more than 4 corners was round. Well, that's an easy cop-out. So we have tons and tons of descriptions calling it round. But now that's because those people are stupid. They couldn't tell the difference between an octagon and a circle. I don't think so. And actually, we will see in a minute that this is not true. But yeah, definitely, I'm sure he wouldn't allow this kind of reasoning for somebody who would argue against him. This is just, it's beyond pure speculation. This is just, totally, I don't even have words for this. Calling it a rationalization is probably the most charitable way of phrasing it, but it's definitely a very unfounded rationalization. Okay, let's go on. A priest, Johann from Würzburg in Germany, confirms the above decorations in the 1160s. He also delivers a detailed observation of the exterior and interior of the Dome of the Rock. Let me put emphasis on its unclear description. The upper part of the walls were octagonal with 5 windows each and more elevated. Narrower inner walls was round with 12 windows. This matches the modern appearance vaguely. Not only vaguely, this also contradicts what AJ has just said above, but again, let's just look at what Johann from Würzburg said. So, he writes, "Now this same temple of the Lord, which has been adorned by someone both within and without, with a wondrous casing of marble, has the form of a beautiful rotunda, or rather a circular octagon. that is, having 8 angles disposed in a circle with a wall decorated on the outside from the middle upwards with the finest mosaic work. The remainder is of marble. The same lower wall is continuous, save that it is pierced by 4 doors. Okay, so clearly Johann from Würzburg can identify an octagon, and he can describe it. Here he has described the lower portion of the wall of the octagon, which was covered in marble. Again, this is in line with other descriptions we have. Now he goes on with the upper part of the octagon. So much for the lower part of the wall. Now in the upper part of it, of the said wall, I mean where the admirable mosaic work is, there are windows inserted in such a manner that there are 5 on each of the 8 sides, except the sides on which the doors of the temple are, which contain only 4 windows. On the whole number of the windows is 36. Between this external circumscribing wall and the inner great marble columns, which are 12 in number and support the inner narrower, higher and altogether round wall. So again, it's round, not an octagon. AJ even had to acknowledge this in his description here, but he just ignores it. It's probably too inconvenient. Because his entire argument is that it was an octagon until the 19th century or the 18th century. So now it brings up the next one. This time it's Theodosius. Despite their interest in details, Theodosius and Johann have this in common. They neither describe the dedicatory inscription of the builder nor the verses with the first evidence for the Quran and the word Islam. They do not provide for helpful mosaic descriptions. One reason why that could happen is that most of these people couldn't speak or let alone read Arabic. For them, the Arabic script would just have been an ornament. For them, it wasn't even script. Unless they were they lived in the region for years, and even then. So we have, for instance, documents about pilgrims going. Not pilgrims. We have documents about missionaries from the 14th century going to the Middle East, and most of them didn't even speak Arabic. So the Catholic Church introduced a school specifically for missionaries, and there were 10 missionaries or so attended it to learn Arabic. So it was the exception that people spoke Arabic, and that school wasn't founded until the 14th century. Pilgrims coming to the Holy Land, they wouldn't be able to read the inscriptions. So of course they wouldn't be able to describe them. They wouldn't even know that there's an inscription. They wouldn't recognize it as such. They would just see mosaics. But there's one more thing. So here we have another source. Here he quotes it in Latin. I've highlighted the interesting bit, but we can also look at it in English. So this is Theodosius, as H.G. Deus calls him, or Theoderich, as he's named here in the Palestine Pilgrims Text Society's document. So how does he describe it? He says the temple itself is evidently of an octagonal shape in its lower part. Okay, so again he can count to 8, that's good, more than AJ would us have belief. But the upper wall forms a narrow circle, resting on arches within the building and supports a leaden roof which has on its summit a great ball with a gilded cross above it. So again, Crusader times, there was a cross there. But this is exactly how the Dome of the Rock looks like today. You have these, let's look at the floor plan once again. So you have this inner circle of columns, and on those columns rises the drum and the actual dome and the cupola. And that's round, a circle, just like Theodosius described and like Johann described and all the others described that we've read before. The Russian abbot, what's his name, Daniel, they all saw a circular or a round dome here. And what's AJ's response? They can't count to 8. Another bone of contention for AJ Deus is the question which role Umar played in the construction of the Dome of the Rock. And here he quotes another pilgrim from the 12th century, and he said, "Upon the site of the sanctuary, Umar ben al-Khattab erected an edifice with a very large and magnificent cupola, into which the Gentiles do not bring any image or effigy, but they merely come to pray." So now he tries to make this argument that nobody knows who built the Dome of the Rock. Was it al-Malik? Was it Umar? Was it al-mamun? Well, I think the answer is pretty simple. Al-mamun tried to replace the name of al-Malik. He tried to erase the Umayyads. So he clearly didn't build the Dome of the Rock. Nobody believes that he built the Dome of the Rock, not even in his own time. It has always been connected with al-Malik. At the same time, it's often also called the Dome of Umar. Why? Because according to the Islamic legend, Umar was the one who found the rock underneath the rubble on the Temple Mount. And then during Umar's time was also when this wooden structure was built, which Al-Kulf did identify in 670. So that's the connection to Umar. So he is sort of connected to the precursor building of the Dome of the Rock and also to the rock itself as its discoverer or rediscoverer. So there really is no mystery. Another description from 1355 by Ibn Battuta notes interior ornaments with gilding and colors. Even though we expect the presence of dedicatory inscriptions, he mentions none of them, including al-mamuns. In 1448 AD, the roof of the dome is destroyed by a fire and restored by Sultan al-Malik as Zahir. Okay, so why don't we hear about these dedicatory inscriptions? It's actually a good question. We just don't know. But the thing is, let me show you the dome real quick again. Now look again at where they're situated. They are above these arches here, around the ambulatory. And here, this is a person in comparison. So it's quite high up and right underneath the roof with very little light coming here. So it's very difficult to read them at all. And of course, the focus of anybody going inside is the main structure, is the dome itself with all its golden mosaics and the huge cupola and all of that. So this is really why people go in there. It's possible that some people saw it, but when describing Dome of the Rock, they typically focus on the main building. So it's not like this is the highlight of this building. It's an aside. Around 1453, the Ottoman Sufi Sheikh Ahmed Yazıcıoğlu claims that Solomon's temple would be the site of the next prophet's heavenly ascension. The dome had bejeweled walls inscribed with the Muslim profession of faith. Well, that's actually what's on the inscription, right? At least in parts. A dome with a gold mihrab built by Gabriel and a prayer station, Maqam, made by Al-Qidr, who revealed the places of the scales, the bridge of Sirat, and other signs of the judgment. The author points out that after the temple's destruction, the rock was rediscovered by Caliph Umar. See, that's what the story I just told. The lost signs were then reinstalled in their appointed places in Umayyad times, during the construction of the Dome of the Rock and the Aqsa Mosque. Not a word about Abd al-Malik. Well, not about him, but about the Umayyads, right? And he was one. Okay, so then we have here the German Felix Fabry, another pilgrim. He actually wrote a very lengthy account, so I also have that, but I'm not gonna go into that because it's way too long. He does not see or recognize an Arab inscription, according to H.E. Deus, but yeah, well, in this case he's right. And he writes that his description includes a magnificent mosaic decoration upon a gold ground on the upper half of the outer walls that are in the forms of trees, palms, and olive trees, and the figures of cherubim, for they do not suffer other images or lifelike sculptures. Now again, Deus takes him at his word here. Like everything he sees in a picture or reads in a text, he takes at face value, except if they say that the dome is round, then they can't count to 8. But here, what has happened here? Well, once again, let me show you the perspective of Fabri or anybody else. This is what you would have seen. So it would be very difficult to make out anything. What we do know about the original mosaics on the outside is that there definitely was some floral imagery. So the original mosaics that were found, that they do contain some leaves. So that much makes sense, and is also in line with what we see, for instance, on the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus. But of course here the bone of contention are the cherubim. Were there ever cherubim on the dome? I mean, at the end of the day, we don't know, but it's highly unlikely. It is said about the Temple of Solomon, the original temple, that it had cherubim. So it's possible that he interpreted that into what he saw, or maybe this is just a reference to biblical stories. Be that as it may, we can't answer this, but there probably weren't cherubim. Okay, also from the end of the 15th century, Muchir el-Din writes that the interior and exterior walls of the Dome of the Rock were decorated with colorful mosaics, even up high. But like Fabri before, he neither gives us the builder nor the inscription. Okay, in this case I would say absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Yes, he described the outside of the dome. That seems to have been his goal, and he achieved it. So now here they come to the pictures. We've looked at those before. Now here it gets interesting again. Another description is from the German Heinrich Bünting in 1582. The text claims that the Dome of the Rock being round, well here he emphasizes here round, makes it cursive, and artwork having been mounted inside and out by the Turkish Sultan. The text asserts that the latter also built the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It recites the tradition that the Melchizedek, that has Melchizedek having broken bread and wine on the rock. So this is actually a tradition that's very old, going back to pre-Islamic times. That's something we will look into in the next videos. But let's continue here. Later authors will elevate our understanding that round was not precise and likely meant 8 square round. Yeah. We've seen already before that they could differentiate between an octagon and a circle. We have had at least two pilgrims who've described the Dome of the Rock as having an octagon base building and then a round dome rising above it. So clearly they can differentiate between round and 8 square round, whatever that means. Okay, but continuing. Because no Christian could approach the rock or go underneath without bribing the guards, Bünting relies on Bernhard von Breitenbach's description of the cave from 1483. That's a book which I happen to own, and yeah, Breitenbach also didn't see it, right? He also had second-hand descriptions, which he put in his book. He wasn't allowed to go near the dome either. He relates that the Dome of the Rock was completely destroyed several times in 1012 and 1046, and also under Suleiman. Apparently during Breitenbach's visit, the tomb of Jesus Christ is under the rock. Towards the end of the 16th century, it has been moved to the Church of the Sepulchre. Now we're getting into crazy territory again. Clearly, the Holy Sepulchre was always the place where Christians believed Jesus' grave was. And the grave was never under the rock and was never moved to the Holy Sepulchre. Now, he could have he couldn't have a point, but there is something. So, according to some pre-Islamic Christian beliefs, particularly among Eastern Syrians, the cave underneath the rock was the tomb of Adam, and it was also in a way a symbol or symbolic for Jesus' tomb, but it was never believed to have been Jesus' tomb. Okay, but even better is here that he claims the Dome of the Rock was completely destroyed several times in 1012 and 1046. And then he gives us a footnote. Let's have a look at that footnote. So this is written in German. Luckily, I can understand it. So let me try and translate. In the year after Christ's birth, 1012, the Caliph and Egyptian Sultan has taken the city of Jerusalem and has destroyed the beautiful temple which Emperor Constantine the Great built above the Holy Grave. Okay, so that doesn't sound like the Dome of the Rock. Emperor Constantine the Great didn't build the Dome of the Rock above the Holy Grave. He built the Holy Sepulchre, Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So that is what has been destroyed in 1012. But with the help of the emperor in Constantinople, the Christians rebuilt it. Okay, so that's what happened in 1012. So the Christians rebuilt the Church of the Holy Sepulchre after it had been destroyed. They didn't rebuild the Dome of the Rock, clearly. Then, in the year 1246, Sassanus, the Tartar king, was sent by the Sultan, or was called by the Sultan, and came with a large army into the Jewish lands. He took the city of Jerusalem, he killed the Christians, and destroyed the Holy Grave. But the monks have rebuilt the Holy Grave and had to pay the Egyptian Sultan yearly tribute. Okay, again, talking about the Holy Grave, that's the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, not the Dome of the Rock. So I don't know what AJ was reading here. The Dome of the Rock was not completely destroyed several times. According to this text, it was the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and obviously so. And now I don't know if he understood it, and that's why he added this part about the grave being moved to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Does he claim that the original Dome of the Rock was built by Constantine the Great? I don't know. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever here. Once again, reading comprehension is simply not present, or he's just disingenuous. I don't know. I can't tell. Either AJ is completely incompetent or completely disingenuous, because this doesn't make any sense what he's writing here, and it doesn't fit his own footnote. I mean, he did put the footnote here, so I guess he's not disingenuous, so just incompetent. But still, I don't know what that was supposed to be. If you can't read it, you should get somebody who can. But yeah, it gets worse. Now we come to his coup de grace, his main piece of evidence. And let's read what he has to say. So this is now about... Wait, maybe I should read a bit more. So last time we already looked at this picture here. I'll just read this again. So Elzear Horn was a custodian of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem between 1725 and 1726, and secretary of the convent Saint Salvatoris between 1737 and 1738. His book with drawings of holy edifices is published in 1744. Horn's design shows something strikingly new, the drum in its modern form. And now, as we've seen, the drum clearly has always been round. So it wasn't something strikingly new. We've seen it on drawings, but even more so in all the accounts of the Pilgrims. But there's more to his book, and this is AJ's big win, or so he thinks. Horn did not only deliver designs of a new drum that have been imprinted in countless academic articles, but also a dedicatory inscription, one that only comes as a surprise to those who have not paid attention. That was overlooked by the same academics. Well, I will argue it was not overlooked, but let's see. So this here is from the book of Elzear Horn, and this is supposed to be the dedicatory inscription as he saw it. Now, what does AJ write about it? He says, it means nothing less than that the correction of al-malik's signature to al-mamun was not there in the early 18th century. Now we also know that not long before al-malik's signature was not there either. It must have originated in 1520 and 30s, in the 1520s and 30s with Umar's signature. So again, completely baseless just because somebody said that it was built by Umar in an account. Connecting the Umar legend with the Dome of the Rock itself. I mean, that's definitely something that happened, that we hear that more than once, that people connected to Umar, and we'll hear it again in a minute. But it's also explained through the tradition that Umar built the original structure there, and Abd al-Malik built the new one, the Dome of the Rock. So yeah, there's no mystery here. But now let's look at what's actually written here. So here is the translation. In fact, the translation is only the first sentence, and then the rest is also from the book. The reason for the building of this temple, which the Most High God made famous, was the son of a great King Merwan, with whom God has mercy. This happened in the year 63 of the Saracens, who began their own annals from the year of Christ 622. Hence, according to our reckoning, the year of Christ is 685, in which Sotumondo, the son of Merwan, reigned, the caliph after Mahomet the 11th, named Abd al-Malik. But I would like you to understand them well, that I am not the builder of the temple, but the restorer. Now, this is confusing already because the translation is not great. My Latin is terrible to non-existent, but apparently HED's is even worse. So if this is true, so the first sentence here is supposedly what was written in the Dome of the Rock when Elzear Horn saw it. And if that's true, then yeah, HA definitely has a point. If there was no al-mamun, then yeah. But having seen how HA works in the past, I was immediately skeptical. So first of all, I've looked at the footnote, and here we have the excerpt from the book, but it starts with the inscription. And then follows what he translates here. It's just that he doesn't translate it very well. So I looked at the original. I went to the Vatican Digital Library and did get a copy for myself. So that's here. So here we have also the picture of the dome. And then comes the text. And this was actually pretty difficult because, as I said, my Latin is non-existent, and then it's very hard to decipher those letters anyway with all the discoloring and so on. So here's the bit, the Arabic inscription, or the supposed Arabic inscription, and then below is the translation to Latin, and that's what H.A. Deus has translated in his document. Okay, but then as usual, I was interested in the context. So I thought, okay, so this is what comes afterwards. This is the translation, but what comes before it? So what exactly did he see, and where did he see it? Because that's not in H.A. Deus's paper. He doesn't mention. He just says he read the dedication in Dome of the Rock. But what dedication, and where did he read it, and so on. So that wasn't clear. So I thought, let me double check, and that's what I did. And I made my own translation here. As I said, my Latin is absolutely terrible to non-existent, so particularly the beginning of my translation is not very good. But I think it becomes clear what's being said. So, climbing up a staircase to the roof, one arrives at a narrow passage where another row of rounded walls are supported by wooden beams, around which in any angle a window is seen, with the hemisphere above being covered with a lead roof. And this wall, in like manner, is adorned in the Damascene style, just like the lower part. So actually there is the space between the roof and the wall where you can go into. So that's a thing. And now he describes what he's seen. And initially I thought, this isn't the inscription we are talking about at all. This must be something else. But when you read it, it definitely sounds like he's talking about the inscription in the ambulatory. So I think either I was missing something in my translation, or maybe there's more context before. I didn't translate the whole thing, of course. But I think he definitely did talk about the inscriptions in the ambulatory, so the ones we are interested in. So okay, maybe HA does have a point, but let's go on. So here is how it describes it. At the upper ends of both sides of the wall, one line was drawn in a circle written in large Arabic letters, and they are both believed to speak of the time by which the builder and restorer incurred the larger part of the expenses and the time at which the work was incepted and also was completed. Okay, so what he describes does sound like the ambulatory. There we have inscriptions on both sides of these arches. And there is a dedication which does speak of the time it was built, and that's the time where the expenses incurred and where it was incepted and also completed. So it seems like a match. All right, let's move on. Then he writes, P. Murianus de Maleo, former prelate of the Holy Land, as he himself recalls in his Terra Sancta Novita Illustrata, was trying to procure for himself a copy of this inscription, but despite his special attention and caution, he has only obtained a fragment, which he thus utters in Arabic in reverse order. Then comes the Arabic text. Then here is the way it's pronounced using Latin, and then the translation that follows. The reason for the building of this temple, which the Most High God made famous, was the son of a great king, Marwan, with whom God has mercy. This happened in the year 63 of the Saracens, who began their own annals from the year of Christ 622. Hence, according to our reckoning, the year of Christ is 685, in which only the son of Marwan reigned, the 11th caliph after Muhammad, named al-malik. But I would like you to understand that he was not the builder of the temple, but the restorer. Okay, so the translation which came afterwards, HA got more or less correct, except for this last bit. It's not that I am not the builder, but it's that he was not the builder, but the restorer, and then he couldn't translate Sotomundo. Okay, but the interesting bit is this before. So what Elzear Horn tells us is that it wasn't him who saw this text. He refers to P. Murianus de Maleo, who procured this piece of text, which is supposedly a part of the inscription. So I thought, okay, that's interesting. So we're no longer talking about an eyewitness here, but luckily Elzear also gives us a reference. So apparently P. Murianus de Maleo wrote a text called Terra Sancta Novita Illustrata. So I tried to find that, which wasn't easy because actually he did write the text, but it was Italian, and here Elzear gives us the Latin translation, which made it difficult to find, but eventually I did find it. In Italian it's called Terra Santa Nuovamente Illustrata. So what did he write? Well, here's the chapter on the Temple of Solomon. This is now in Italian, and again I have to apologize, my Italian is just as bad as my Latin. It's non-existent, more or less. But I tried to translate it one as well. So that's now here. What does our friend Mariano Morone da Maleo write? Oh yeah, and by the way, this was in 1669, so we're also no longer in the 18th century, we're now in the 17th century. So from the eyewitness from the 18th century, we've now already moved 1 century to the past, and he writes, at present, there is also a temple in Jerusalem said to be of Solomon, but from that which was said in the preceding chapter, we can already see that it has nothing but the name of Solomon, because it was built in the same place. Hence, from the Storia de Saraceni, we know that the modern temple was built by a prince of theirs named Humar Gottab, third after Maometto, who used the ruinous situation in the Holy Land due to the 14-year war between Persia and Emperor Heraclius. Umar departed from those parts with a formidable army, passed into Syria, and took the holy city of Jerusalem. He built this temple, or rather mosque, octangular, with beautiful stones and frames, gilded and painted in the Damascene style, standing in the middle of a large square, with a good view standing out, and from our terrace of Santa Salvatore you can almost see everything. From what Turkish friends told me, there is no altar inside, no statues, no picture, because they are abolished by Mahometans. But a large number of lamps which light up like the evening star, and even more so in their Ramadan. It has a wooden gate where the women stand, they see and are not seen by the men, and it's all covered with lead. Okay, so that's a description of the Dome of the Rock. But now comes the interesting bit. There are some inscriptions in the Arabian language, and I was curious to have a copy, but for all my diligence I was able to acquire only a fragment, which translates to: the reason for the building of the noble temple that the Most High God ennobled was the great king, son of Meswan, may God have mercy on him. And it was the year 65 of the Saracens, but the annals began in the year of Christ 621, so that it becomes the year 686 of Christ. But it seems that this inscription is contrary to what was said above, since the son of Meswan was al-malik, that is to say, servant of the king. Therefore he was not Umar the builder, but it is replied that he was sooner an expander than a founder. Okay. Did you catch that? So, first of all, here we have the origin of this, but I would like you to understand that he was not the builder, but the restorer. Our friend here, Mariano Morone D'Amaleo, believes that Umar built the temple. Apparently he has heard those Umar stories. And he thinks that al-malik was the restorer of the temple, whereas Umar was the builder. But more importantly, he has to rely on Turkish friends here to tell him anything about the inside. Why? Because he can't get inside because he's Christian, and Christians couldn't get into the dome. So he is not an eyewitness either. So from our eyewitness from the 18th century, we've now moved to a non-eyewitness in the 17th century. And he has heard that there's an inscription, but he didn't see it, and he got hold of a piece of paper, presumably with some Arab letters on it, which told him that the reason for the building of the noble temple was al-malik. Although it doesn't even mention al-malik by name, it just says son of Marwan. So where did he get this from? Who knows? This seems like a second-degree hearsay, at least. So presumably somebody who vaguely remembered the inscription told him what it said from his memory, and this was then mixed with whatever else he knew. But it's, or he assumed. So, I mean, as we saw before, everybody knew that al-mamun was not the builder. And it was widely believed that al-malik was the builder, as all those stories from Arab sources tell us. So that's what our friend here was told by his Turkish friends then. And now we see that H.A. Deus, he doesn't read his own sources. All he had to do was to go up one paragraph and translate it, and then he would have seen that it wasn't Elzear Horn who saw this, it was somebody else. And then he could have gone and do what I did and find the original source and see that he wasn't an eyewitness either. So the entire case of H.A. Deus is really now collapsing on itself. This main argument he's put forth, that there's a late inscription seen by an eyewitness which looks different than the inscription today, turns out to be nothing but thin air. Okay, so then again he continues to argue now that the mosaics in the drum originate in 1817 and were completed before 1833. Again, because he has a source in 1833 which mentions them, and then some pictures which don't align with the dome perfectly as it is today. So that's why he thinks it has to be done after 1817, right? Because again, he takes those pictures all at face value. So the top one is of course legitimate, but then here he has another picture with like this high high dome. Yeah, here, and again he takes it at face value. He thinks, oh yeah, that's what it must have been what must have looked like. And then here the next one has an octagonal drum. So of course it must have had an octagonal drum. But then by by the late 19th century, we're slowly getting somewhere, right? So that's H's line of reasoning. Yeah, if there's an octagonal drum on this picture here, then of course the Dome of the Rock must have had an octagonal drum at that point in time. No question about it. Of course, this is extremely naive reasoning. So now let's look at his conclusion. So AJ believes that he has showed or proven the following. Two structures were on the Temple Mount at the end of the 7th century: the Sufyanid Mosque to the east and the Marwanid Synagogue to the north. Now, as we've seen, though, the Sufyanid Mosque, that's this wooden structure which Al-Kulf talks about, which he places to the eastern wall. We've looked at that in our introduction video. Clearly, that wasn't the case. It was either on the rock or towards the south of the Temple Mount. And then this Marwanid Synagogue, he thinks was there because of what Bernard the Wise said in 870, where H.A. completely misread the phrase "to the north," which he took to mean to the north of the Temple Mount, but in reality it was to the north of the southern wall. And we found out by reading on that he was indeed talking about the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So what he believes to be the Marwanid Synagogue is actually the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And it's not in the north, it's in the south of the Temple Mount. So one sentence and already we have 3 errors. Great start. No evidence of a building over the foundation stone exists, but a third structure is likely. Well, we've seen the evidence. There's tons of evidence. There's the evidence of the building efforts in the 7th century, but at the very least, we have Bernard the Wise, who clearly talks about the Dome of the Rock in 870. So that is unambiguous. Next one. After the earthquake from 846 AD, between 870 and 897, a first prototype was built over the foundation stone. Again, we've shown this to be incorrect. By 870, the Dome of the Rock was already standing there, emerging simultaneously with tradition, which again does make sense. How could that happen? That wouldn't fly. Just like it didn't fly when al-mamun put his name on the inscription, right? That nobody believed it because they all were there and they knew that it wasn't true. Similarly, nobody would have believed it if al-malik's name was now put up there hundreds of years after his death, when he didn't build the dome. It wouldn't have worked. Before 985 AD, the Dome of the Rock is attested to be octagonal. Yes, well, the ambulatory, yes. But we also hear that the dome is round. I'm not sure if that was already before 985, to be honest. So maybe he has a point there. The Al-Aqsa Mosque is at its current position no sooner than in the mid-12th century. Possible. I mean, there definitely was something there, which Bernard the Wise saw in 870, but it could have been in a slightly different spot. So, yeah, maybe. The Jewish serpent king and the designs of his royal brothers and on the inner octagonal are Messianic Jewish and originate between 1523 and 1548. Now again, I'm not going to go into this. I'll just say it's not true. You can read the article. This whole Jewish serpent king thing, doesn't make any sense to me. But this is not the topic of this video, so please read it for yourself and make up your own mind. the inscription is from the same time, but pretended to be dedicated by Umar. Again, not true. I don't think there's any evidence to suggest that there was a dedication by Umar in there, or something that pretends to be a dedication by Umar. And also the inscriptions, on the inner octagonal, are likely much older. It is possible that the entire Dome of the Rock was replaced and the Al-Aqsa Mosque built then. I guess everything's possible, but this is extremely, extremely unlikely, beyond unlikely. Maybe he thinks this dedication to Umar was there because there were some people around this time who wrote that it was built by Umar. Which would then again be a typical leap of logic that's totally unwarranted. I can't take it serious, to be honest. This just doesn't make sense. A complete substitution of the drum was commissioned in 1720 and completed no later than 1744. Again, why those dates? Because of some depictions that we've seen, that he found. He found a picture in 1720 with an octagonal drum, and then he found a picture from 1744 with a round drum. Therefore, it must have changed in between. No, that's not the case. You have to look at what kind of picture are you dealing with. Does it try to be accurate? Is it maybe just symbolic? Is it on a map, a small thing that needs to be recognizable but easy to carve in a piece of wood to make a woodcut? Who made it? Did they see the Dome of the Rock, or did they rely on another depiction, or did they see it only from afar? All of that has to be taken into account. You can't just jump to these wild conclusions, particularly if there's evidence to the opposite. So we have tons of evidence of a round drum, both in written text as well as in depictions. Okay, what else did you show? al-Malik's dedication is a cover-up executed between 1720 and 1744, replaced the dedication by Umar. I have no idea how he gets there, because he himself brought up these old traditions that connect the Dome of the Rock with al-Malik. He places it between 1720 and 1744 because that's when Elzear Horn sort of saw it and wrote his book. But now we've seen that can't be true, because he took it from another book 100 years earlier. So, I mean, that alone disproves him here. But then even the one 100 years earlier was not an eyewitness. So, completely debunked, I would say. The cupola was completely replaced under Sultan Mahmud II after 1817 and before 1833. Again, he uses these pictures as evidence. I didn't go into them. It's just the same he's done before. There's no real evidence. I mean, it's possible that it was replaced, but we need more than just looking at a couple of pictures where in one image somebody drew the dome a bit taller and another a bit flatter. That doesn't constitute evidence. That's just differently skilled artisans. The first primary evidence of the mosaic on the drum is from 1833. They belong, therefore, to a large-scale renovation by Mahmud. So we jumped over this one, but from 1833 we now have a description of the inscriptions as we know them today. And since AJ believes to have shown that by 1744 the inscription was different, he comes to the conclusion that they were a result of a large-scale renovation by Mahmud. Nothing here makes sense. So, I mean, his entire foundation of his arguments, they all crumbled, right, when we looked into the evidence. None of it is true. Starting at the very beginning with Arculf in 670, where he misplaces the construction by the Saracens, going via Bernard the Wise, where he completely misreads him, and instead of understanding that Bernard talks about both the temple of the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, he thinks that he talks about a different building altogether. And then all the way to Elzear Horn, who was neither an eyewitness nor was the text he printed recorded by an eyewitness. So it all falls flat on its face here. Yeah, I have to say I'm really disappointed by H.A. Deus. I went into this, I was skeptical from the beginning, but I was open-minded, I would say, and I was intrigued by some of the questions that he asked, and I think those are valid questions. So it's definitely something that needs to be investigated. But what he's doing, like with every piece of evidence that he presents, whenever I looked at it, I found out that it usually says the exact opposite of what he says it does. So yeah, I'm really disappointed, and I have to say my opinion of H.A. Deus has really decreased dramatically, and it's a shame that he's fooled people with this. I don't even know what to call it. These wild fantasies. This vivid imagination of his, without the skill to back it up with facts, or without the skill to find out that it's wrong in this case, right? Or maybe, yeah, again, it could be that he's disingenuous, but I don't think so. I just think he's incompetent. Anyway, this has already been going on for too long. So if anything, please be careful with what you read, and double check what people say, because here this really looked legitimate what H.A. was doing. He had all those sources and then those footnotes in all those different languages, and it seemed all so legit. But when you look at it, at every time he got to the exact opposite conclusion of what actually was there. So that would be my suggestion: always double check. Yeah. So if you like what you saw and you think what I did is of value, then I would totally appreciate it if you left a like and if you subscribe to my channel. If you think you know people who might also enjoy it, please recommend it to them as well. And of course, you can always support me on Patreon. You can get early access to some of my videos, but most importantly, you can support my work, because as you've seen, this is a lot of work that went into this. I had to check out a lot of books and articles and maps and images, and I had to translate texts, and yeah, lots and lots of work, not to mention the recording, cutting, uploading. So yeah, of course, all available for free. But if you think it has value for you, then I would totally appreciate it if you could join my Patreon group or donate via PayPal. Anyway, that's it for today. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.